You need not pretend, madam. I married you because my grandfathers will required it, and for no other reason under heaven. Julian Ashcombe, 7th Duke of Elverton, said the words at his own wedding breakfast without lowering his voice. And he watched the woman he had wed that morning receive them the way a well-built wall receives rain, without flinching, without answer, only with a small inclination of her head, as though he had remarked upon the weather. It should have satisfied him. Instead, for reasons he did not trouble to examine, it left a faint and disagreeable taste at the back of his throat, like wine that has begun imperceptibly to turn. He had expected tears, or the sulking silence of a woman storing up grievance. Marianne, for that was her name, Marianne Wayland that had been, and now absurdly, Marianne Ashcombe, Duchess of Elverton, did neither. She set down her fork with a quietness that seemed almost a courtesy to the silver, folded her hands in her lap, and looked at him with grey eyes that held nothing he could name and nothing he could use. "Then we understand one another, your grace," she said. "I am glad of it. Understanding makes for an orderly house." It was, he thought irritably, exactly the sort of thing a governess would say, and she had very nearly been one. That was the whole shabby matter of her, laid bare. Her father, Sir Henry Wayland, had held land that marched with the old Elverton acres in the north, and had died with more mortgages than sense, and the 7th Duke's grandfather, a hard, far-seeing old man who had ruled Elverton for 60 years and ruled it still from his grave through the iron machinery of his will, had decided, in his last months, that the two properties should be joined by marriage before Julian was 30. Failed to marry a Wayland daughter by that birthday, the will said, and the whole of the unentailed northern estate, the timber, the mines, the rents that made Elverton twice as rich as its title suggested, passed to a cousin in Lisbon whom Julian had met once and disliked thoroughly. So Julian had married a Wayland daughter. There had been two of them. The elder, Cassandra, was a beauty who laughed easily and danced beautifully, and had made it abundantly plain, in the one interview he had granted the family, that she would be delighted to be a duchess. The younger Marianne had sat by the cold window with a book of accounts in her lap, and had said almost nothing, and had watched him with those grey eyes as though she were adding him up and finding the sum disappointing. He had chosen the younger. He had told himself it was because Cassandra's eagerness wearied him, and because the quiet one would make fewer demands, and because a man who marries for a clause in a will may as well take the wife who expects the least of him. All of these were true. He did not admit, even to himself, the fourth reason, that Cassandra's beauty had made him feel bought, and the grey-eyed sister's indifference had felt, obscurely, like the only honest thing in the room. Now the honest thing sat at the far end of his table in a gown that was 3 seasons out of fashion, and the great families of the county filed past to offer their congratulations, and Julian saw the flick of their eyes, the small compression of well-bred mouths, the way Lady Ferrers looked at Marianne's sleeves, and then looked away as if she had seen something unfortunate. They thought he had married beneath himself, and made a poor bargain of it, and taken the plainer sister into the bargain like a man too indifferent even to choose well. Let them think it. He had not married to please Lady Ferrers. "You will find," he said, rising when the breakfast at last dragged to its end, "that I keep to mine hours and my own concerns. The house is yours to run. The servants have their instructions. I dine at 8 when I dine at home, which is seldom. You need not wait upon me, and I shall not wait upon you." He drew on his gloves. "I go up to town on Thursday. I do not expect you will wish to accompany me." "No, your grace," she agreed. "I shall not wish it." He had meant it as a dismissal, and she had turned it, with 3 quiet words, into an agreement freely given, so that he was left with the odd sensation of having asked for something and been granted it as a favour. He frowned at her. She met the frown with composure. There was a smudge of ink, he noticed absurdly, on the side of her forefinger. She had been writing that very morning, the morning of her wedding, some list or letter or column of figures, and the smallness of the detail annoyed him past all reason. He went up to town on Thursday, and he did not think of her again for a long while. London swallowed him as it always did. There was the House, where he sat through debates on the corn duties and said little and voted as his interest required. There were the clubs, White's and Brooks's, and the long green tables and the longer nights. There was the theatre, and there was the widow Lady Ancaster, whose company he had kept, discreetly and without commitment, for the better part of 2 years, and who greeted his marriage with the amused tolerance of a woman who understood that a duke's wedding and a duke's affections were separate accounts entirely. He gave the world no cause for open scandal. He was too proud for that, and there had been, for all his coldness, no dishonor in his conduct toward the marriage bed, only a careful and complete absence from it. But he lived as he had lived before, and the fact of a wife in the country changed nothing that he could perceive. Marianne wrote to him once a fortnight. The letters were brief and admirably clear. The east chimney had been repaired. The roof of the tenant's cottage at Marden had been made good before the frosts. The steward's accounts for the quarter were enclosed, and she begged to draw his attention to an irregularity in the timber sales, which she believed the agent had overlooked, and which she had taken the liberty of querying. He read the first 3 or 4 of these letters with half an eye and set them aside. He read the 5th more carefully, because the irregularity in the timber sales turned out to be real and considerable, and had she not queried it, the estate would have been the poorer by some hundreds of pounds. He did not thank her for it. He wrote back a single line, "You did right," continued to oversee the agent, and thought no more of the matter, except that afterward, when a letter came in her small upright hand, he read the whole of it. The season's turn. He was aware, distantly, as one is aware of weather in a country one does not live in, that Elverton in Hertfordshire had begun to be spoken of. A man he scarcely knew remarked at his club that the Duchess of Elverton kept a fine table. Julian, who had never dined at his own table with his own wife, received this news with mild surprise and let it pass. Old Lady Whitmore, whom nobody contradicted, pronounced at a rout that the young Duchess had the truest manners she had seen in 30 years. Not the flash of it, Elverton, the truth of it. There is a difference, though your generation has forgotten it, and Julian bowed and said his wife would be gratified, and privately thought that Lady Whitmore was growing sentimental with age. He went down to Elverton perhaps 4 times in the first 2 years, always briefly, always on business, a matter of a lawsuit, a question of the hounds, once a funeral. Each time the house met him in perfect order. Fires were lit in rooms he had not said he would enter. A dish he had once, years before, remarked that he liked appeared at dinner without his asking. His own study, which he had left in the confusion of a man who never expected to return to it, had been set to rights so exactly. Every paper where his hand would reach for it, every book returned to its shelf, and yet nothing thrown away that he might have wanted, that he stood in the doorway a moment, unaccountably arrested, before he could say to himself that servants had done it, and think of Marianne not at all. She was there, of course, at these brief descents. She poured his coffee and asked after his health and told him what he needed to know of the estate in the fewest possible words, and then withdrew, leaving him the freedom he had demanded of her on their wedding morning. She never reproached him. She never wept. She never by so much as a look asked him to stay a day longer than he meant to. He told himself this was exactly what he had wanted in a wife, and if there was, each time he rode away up the London road, a curious hollow feeling that he could not attach to any cause, he attributed it to the tedium of the country and thought no more about it. It was in the 3rd year that he began, against every intention, to notice her. For those first 3 years, if any man had told the Duke of Elverton that he was an unhappy husband, he would have stared and then he would have laughed. Unhappy? He was nothing of the kind. He was a duke in the prime of his powers, unburdened, unfettered, free to come and go as no married man of his acquaintance was free, and if a wife sat somewhere in Hertfordshire keeping his house, why, so did the roof keep the rain off, and one did not think of the roof. He had built his life to be a smooth machine, and he oiled it well. There was the town house, run by servants who knew better than to trouble him. There were the horses, which he bred and raced and cared for more, if the truth were told, than he cared for most people. There were his 3 or 4 intimates, Standish and Lord Rivenhall, and the poet Crabbe, whom he kept about him for his wit, and there were the endless nights of high play at which he neither won nor lost enough to feel anything, which was, he had come to think, the point of them. He had a reputation for coldness, and he had earned it, and he wore it as a man wears a good coat. It kept things out. Women had tried to warm him and given it up. Men had tried to use him and found him proof against flattery. He was, at 30, precisely the man his grandfather had bred him to be, and he did not know that his grandfather had bred him so on purpose, and would not have cared if he had known. And under it all, though he did not name it, there was a coldness that no coat kept out, 'cause it came from within. He woke sometimes in the London dark with the sense of a great emptiness he could not place, as of a house with all its rooms shut up but one. He filled the feeling with wine or with cards, or with the widow Lady Ancaster's undemanding company, and by morning he had forgotten it. He was very good at forgetting the feeling. He had had a great deal of practice. Meanwhile, 90 miles to the north and west, his wife was building something, and now and then a rumor of it reached him, the way a man in a lit room hears, faintly, the weather changing outside. He learned, from a letter he read only half of, that the Duchess had reorganized the entire management of the home farm, dismissing the drunken bailiff his grandfather had kept out of a misplaced loyalty, and that the farm had shown a profit for the first time in a decade. He learned from Standish that his wife had nursed the whole village of Elverton through a bad winter fever, going herself into the cottages with broth and physit, when 3 of the doctors had taken to their beds, and that not one soul in the parish had died who might have been saved. He learned from a stray remark of Lady Ferrers that was meant to wound and did not, for how can a man be wounded through a wife he never thinks of, that the Duchess of Elverton was making herself remarkably useful, in a managing sort of way, for a woman of no family. None of it moved him. Or rather, it moved him so slightly, so far beneath the surface, that he mistook the small disturbance for boredom and went to his club. He signed the letters she sent. He sent her, twice a year, a curt line of approval for some sum well spent or some matter well handled. He thought of her, when he thought of her at all, as a competent servant of unusual gentility, an asset of the estate, like the good forester or the sound roof. It did not occur to him to wonder whether the woman doing all this good among his people was lonely. It did not occur to him to wonder whether a young woman of 26, quick and deep and full of feeling, found her days empty in a great house with an absent lord. He had told her on their wedding morning that he would not wait upon her, and he had been as good as his word, and he congratulated himself, in the rare moments he examined the matter at all, on the perfect success of the arrangement. The nearest he came, in all those 3 years, to seeing her whole was one grey afternoon in the second winter, when he came down unannounced to fetch some papers and found the great hall of Elverton full of children. He stopped in the doorway. There were perhaps 30 of them, the children of the tenants and the village, seated on benches, slates in their laps, and at the head of the room stood his wife, chalk in hand, teaching them their letters. She had not heard him. He stood in the shadow of the doorway and watched the Duchess of Elverton, in a plain stuff gown, coax a shamefaced boy of 8 through the spelling of his own name, and saw the boy get it right, and saw his wife's whole face light with a pleasure so genuine, so entirely unfeigned, that Julian felt something turn over in his chest, uncomfortably, like a sleeper stirring toward waking. Then she looked up and saw him, and the light went out of her face, not into coldness, but into the correct, distant, unimpeachable composure she kept for him alone. And she dismissed the children with a word, and came to him, and asked what papers he required, and had them found and in his hand within the quarter hour, so that he might be gone again the sooner. And Julian took his papers and rode back to London, and told himself he had seen nothing worth remarking, and thought about the boy spelling his own name for the whole of the 90 miles, and did not know why. It began with a small thing, as such things do. He had come down to Elverton in November of that 3rd year to settle a boundary dispute with a neighbour, meaning to stay 2 nights and be gone. On the first evening, having dined alone, Marianne had sent word that she was engaged with the tenant's half-yearly accounts and would not disturb him, which he had received as the perfect discretion he had trained her to, and which now obscurely nettled him. He wandered into the long gallery for no reason he could have given, and found it changed. He had grown up in that gallery. It had always been a cold, dim corridor of dead Elvertons, their painted eyes following a boy who ran the length of it in bad weather. The hangings had been faded, the windows draughty, half the portraits so darkened by 2 centuries of smoke that the faces had sunk into their frames like drowned men. Now the room was warm, fires burned at both ends. The windows had been reglazed, he remembered, distantly sanctioning the expense, and the portraits had been cleaned, so that his ancestors looked out of their canvases with a startling living presence, and among them, in the place of honor over the great fireplace, hung the third Duke. The builder of the house, whom Julian had always been told was lost. He was not lost, said Marianne's voice behind him. He had not heard her come. He was in the attics, faced to the wall behind a cistern. The steward believed him ruined by damp. He was only very dirty. A man in St. Albans cleaned him for us. I hope your grace does not object. The account is entered under repairs. Julian turned. She stood in the doorway with a shawl about her shoulders and a candle in her hand, and the candlelight was kind to her, or perhaps 3 years had been, for she did not look to him now as she had looked at her wedding breakfast. She was not a beauty. She would never be a beauty. But there was something in her face, a steadiness, a clarity, a quality of being wholly and unhurriedly present, that a beauty might have envied, and that he found standing in the warm gallery that she had brought back to life he could not easily look away from. I do not object, he said. And then, because the silence wanted filling and he did not know why he wished to fill it, you have done a great deal here. There was a great deal to do. She came a few steps into the room and looked up at the third Duke with an expression he could not read, something like fondness, as though the dead builder were a friend of hers. I hope you are not displeased that I did not consult you. Your letters said the house was mine to run. They did. He heard the stiffness in his own voice and could not soften it. I meant it. I do not withdraw it. He stopped. He had been about to say something he had not planned to say, and the strangeness of the impulse silenced him. The gallery is much improved, he finished. Good night, madam. Good night, your grace. She went, and the candle went with her, and Julian stood a long time in the warm gallery under the eyes of his living ancestors, feeling that something had shifted very slightly in the foundations of a house he had thought he understood, and not knowing what. He stayed a third night and could not have said why. He stayed a fourth. On the fifth day the boundary dispute was settled, and he had no more excuse, and he rode back to London telling himself that the country air had done him good, and finding, some 10 miles up the road, that he had been thinking for the better part of an hour about the ink on her forefinger, and the way the candle had lit the underside of her jaw. That was the beginning of it. He would not have called it anything. He had a great capacity, had Julian Ashcombe, for not calling things anything. In town that winter he found himself doing what he had never done, attending to talk of his own wife. It came at him from every quarter, now that he listened. The Duchess of Elverton had taken in the 2 orphaned daughters of the late vicar, and was housing and schooling them at the Hall, a thing that would have been called eccentric in a lesser woman and was called noble in a duchess. The Duchess of Elverton had settled a quarrel of 10 years' standing between 2 farming families whose feud had gone to law twice and impoverished both, and had done it by the simple expedient of inviting them to dine at the same table and refusing to let either leave until they had shaken hands. The Duchess of Elverton had a way, it was said, of listening to a person as though that person were the only person in England, so that dull men grew witty in her drawing-room and shy girls found their tongues, and old women who had been widowed and forgotten came away feeling they had been, for an hour, remembered. She is the making of Elverton, said his old friend Colonel Standish, over cards. You are a lucky dog, Ashcombe, though I doubt you know it. Half the county would sell its soul for a wife who runs an estate like a chancellor and charms the archbishop, and never says a sharp word to a living creature. Where the devil did you find her? In a cold room with a book of accounts, said Julian, and Standish laughed, thinking it a jest, and Julian did not correct him, though it was the truest thing he had said in a 12-month. He went down to Elverton at Christmas, which he had not done in his life. He told the household it was on account of the tenants' feast, which was true, and told himself the same, which was not. Marianne received him without surprise and without any question in her grey eyes, and gave him the best of the house, and let him alone. And Julian, watching her across the crowded servants' hall on the night of the feast, watching her stoop to speak with an ancient labourer who had worked Elverton land for 60 years, watching that old man's seamed face open like a flower in April, at whatever she said to him, Julian felt, for the first time in his adult life, something that he was honest enough to recognize, and dishonest enough to refuse to name, and it frightened him. He was jealous, not of any man, there was no man. Her conduct was above the breath of suspicion, and he knew it, and it was not that. He was jealous of the old labourer, and the vicar's orphans, and the tenants at their long tables, and the dull men made witty and the shy girls made bold. He was jealous of every creature at Elverton. Because every creature at Elverton had the thing he had thrown away with both hands on his wedding morning, her regard, her attention, the warmth she gave freely to all the world and gave to him only in the correct, distant, unimpeachable measure of a wife who has learned exactly what her husband will accept. She gave him nothing he had not asked for. That was the whole of it. He had asked for an orderly house and no demands and a wife who would not wait upon him, and she had given him precisely that, with a thoroughness that was, he began dimly to perceive, its own kind of judgment. "You are quiet tonight, your grace," she said, when the feast was done and the last of the tenants had gone singing out into the frost, and they stood a moment together in the emptying hall, nearer to one another than they had stood in 3 years. "I was thinking," he said, "that I have never seen you at your work before. This," he gestured at the trestle tables, the guttering candles, the sprigs of holly she had set along the beams, "this is your work, is it not? It is the pleasantest part of it." A small smile touched her mouth, the first he thought he had ever truly seen there, and it was gone before he could be sure. "The accounts are the greater part, but one cannot love an account." "No," he said, "one cannot." And then, greatly daring, feeling absurdly like a green boy, "Marianne, may I not? That is, I find I should like—" "It grows late, your grace," she said gently, and the small smile was quite gone now, and her face had closed like a door closing softly so as not to wake the house. "You will be tired from your journey. I have had the fire made up in your room. Good night." And she left him. She left him standing among the holly and the guttering candles with the half-said thing dead in his mouth, and Julian understood, watching the straight, quiet line of her back as she went, that he had spent 3 years teaching this woman that he did not want her, and that she had learned the lesson perfectly, and that he was now going to have to unteach it if it could be unlearned at all, and that she owed him nothing, nothing whatever, that would make the unlearning easy. He went back to London in the new year a changed and troubled man, though he told no one so, and would scarcely admit it to himself. He found the widow Lady Ancaster's company had lost its savour. He found the clubs tedious, and the debates in the house a species of noise. He found himself, at odd hours, taking out a letter in a small upright hand, some plain report of drainage and rents, and reading it again not for its matter, but for the hand that had made it, and the mind behind the hand, and the fact that this remarkable woman was, by the law of the land and the will of a dead old man, his wife, and a stranger to him, and it was nobody's fault but his own. The courtship, once he had begun it, taught Julian a great deal about himself that he would rather not have learned, and the first lesson was patience, of which he discovered he had none. He had thought, in the exalted humility of that first dinner, that he would woo his wife in a month or 2, that a woman so long neglected would fall gratefully into the space he now made for her, and that by midsummer he would have won her. He was disabused of this within a week. Marianne did not fall into anything. She examined the new state of things the way she examined a column of figures, with attention and without haste, and she gave him exactly the ground he earned and not 1 inch beyond it, and when he pressed, as he did, once out of the old imperious habit, expressing impatience that she would not walk with him because she had promised the hour to a sick tenant, she looked at him with a mild grey steadiness that put him instantly in the wrong. "The tenant has been ill 3 weeks and expects me," she said. "You have been home 3 days and did not, a month ago, expect to be here at all. If you are to court me, your grace, you must court a woman whose word to a dying man outranks her convenience to a duke. I should have thought you would like me the better for it. If you do not, you had better court someone else." And she had gone to the tenant, and Julian had stood in the yard feeling like a schoolboy, and had understood, slowly, that the very qualities that made her worth winning were the qualities that would make her hard to win. That a woman who could be flattered or hurried into loving him would not have been Marianne, and would not have been worth the trouble. So he learned patience, because she left him no choice. He learned it as a man learns a language, badly at first and then better. He learned that she could not be bought, He had, in a first clumsy access of feeling, ordered up from London a great case of jewels, thinking to see her eyes widen, and she had looked at the diamonds with polite bewilderment and asked what they were for. And when he could not answer, had them locked away and never mentioned them again, and had worn, that same evening, a spray of the white roses she had rescued, tucked into her grey gown, and looked lovelier in them than any diamond could have made her. He learned that she could be reached, but only through the things she truly cared for, that if he wished to please her, he must please her people, mend a cottage, remember a servant's sick mother, take real trouble over a real matter. And that any attention paid to her through the estate she loved was worth more to her than any attention paid to herself. He set himself to it. He who had never in his life taken trouble for anyone took trouble now, and found, to his surprise, that it was not a punishment but a strange deep pleasure. He rode out in the rain to a distant farm, because the tenant's boy had a gift for figures and Julian meant to see him schooled. And when he told Marianne of it that evening, not to impress her, only because it was on his mind, he saw her look at him across the table with something new in her face, something that was not yet love but was on the road to it, a dawning tentative respect. The respect of a woman watching a man become slowly and in earnest better than he was. Those were the good weeks. They were not without doubt their reverses. There was an afternoon in April when a letter came from London, from Rivenhall, full of the old life. The races and the play, and a jest at Julian's expense for having gone to grass and turned farmer for love of a plain wife, and something in the mockery of it, the easy contempt of the world he had left, put Julian for an hour into a black and prideful humour. And he was short with a servant and shorter with his wife, and saw the shutter come down at once behind her eyes, the old distance closing over her like water over a stone. It cured him faster than any lecture could have. He apologized that same night, plainly without excuse, and watched her weigh the apology and cautiously accept it, and understood how narrow was the bridge he was building and how far the fall on either side. "You must understand," she said to him quietly that night, "that when you are cold to me, even for an hour, it is not 1 hour I feel. It is 3 years. Every sharp word calls them all back. I do not say it to reproach you. You have apologized, and I believe you, and it is done. I say it so that you will know the size of the thing you are handling. It is not a courtship of an ordinary sort. You are not winning a heart that is whole. You are mending one you broke, and mended things are tender at the seam, and a small blow falls harder there than a great blow falls on sound bone. Be gentle with the seam, Julian, that is all I ask." "I will," he said low. "God help me, I will. Only tell me when I fail. Do not go silent and let me guess. The silence is worse than any anger." "I know it is," she said with the ghost of a smile. "I learned that from a master." And Julian took the hit, for he had earned it, and found he could even laugh at it a little, and understood that they had crossed, in that exchange, some small further distance toward one another that could not have been crossed any easier way. And all the while the county watched and revised and marvelled. The tale of the Duke's reformation was told in every drawing-room within 30 miles, embroidered at each telling, until it had become a thing of legend before it was 6 months old. How the cold Duke of Elverton had come home and fallen in love with his own neglected wife, and courted her like a green boy in his own garden, and been, by all accounts, refused, or if not refused, held at arm's length, which the county found even more delicious. Wagers were laid at the county club as to when the Duchess would relent. The Dowager Countess of Marchburn, who missed nothing, was heard to say that it was the most improving spectacle she had witnessed in 40 years, a proud man made to work for a good woman, and that she only wished more of the young men of her acquaintance might be served the same. It was Lady Ancaster herself in the end who put the matter beyond his power to ignore. He had gone to her rooms in Half Moon Street to end, decently and by daylight, an arrangement that had gone cold in him. He owed her that much courtesy, and she had heard him out with the wry composure that had always been her best quality, and then she had surprised him. "You need not make me a speech, Elverton," she said, pouring the chocolate herself. "I have known for a month you were done with me. Do you know how I knew? You have begun to talk of your wife. Oh, not lovingly. You are far too proud for that, and you scarcely know you do it. But her name comes into your conversation the way a man's tongue goes to a sore tooth. The Duchess did this. The Duchess said that, "My dear, half of London is in love with your Duchess, and you are the last man in England to hear the news, which is exactly as it should be, and exactly like you." She handed him his cup. "Go home. You have a treasure sitting in Hertfordshire doing good and running an estate and making everyone who meets her a little better than they were, and you have never once looked at her. Go home and look." "She will not have me," said Julian, and heard, with a kind of horror, the bald truth come out of him unbidden, to a woman who was very nearly the last person on earth to whom he should have confided it. Lady Ancaster set down her own cup and looked at him with something that was almost pity and almost admiration. "Then you had better learn how to be had," she said. "It will do you good, I should think. You have been a duke your whole life, Elverton. You have never in that time had to earn a single thing you wanted. It will be the making of you or the breaking of you, and either way I shall be sorry to miss the sight." She smiled. "Now finish your chocolate and go, and do not come back. You are a married man, and by the look of you, at last, a properly married one." He went home. It was March, and the roads were foul, and he arrived at Elverton splashed to the eyes and out of temper with himself, which was a new and unwelcome condition, and one he could not seem to shake. Marianne received him in the hall with her usual grave calm, saw the state of him, and had hot water and dry clothes, and a fire before he had done pulling off his gloves, and asked no question at all as to why the Duke of Elverton had come home in the middle of the season without a word of warning, and with the look of a man riding from something rather than toward it. That evening he did a thing he had never done at Elverton. He sent word by the footman that he would dine at 8, and that he hoped the Duchess would do him the honour of dining with him. There was a pause. He learned of it afterward from the footman's studied blankness, before the answer came back that the Duchess would be pleased to wait upon his Grace at 8. She came down in grey silk, plain and very fine, with pearls that had been his grandmother's. He recognized them. She had never worn them before, and he understood that she wore them now as a mark of the occasion's strangeness. A small flag ran up to acknowledge that something unusual was happening, and she sat at the foot of the long table, 20 feet of mahogany and silver and candlelight between them. And Julian looked down the length of it at his wife and felt the 20 feet as an ocean. "This is absurd," he said. It was not what he had meant to say. "This table. Come, sit here, where I can hear you. I did not ask you to dine with me in order to shout across the plate at you like a man hailing a ship. Another woman might have made a coquetry of it, or a triumph." Marianne only rose and moved without fuss to the place the footman set for her at his right hand, and folded her hands and waited. She had done a great many difficult things in 3 years, he thought, with exactly that composure. She was doing this one the same way. "I have been," he began, and stopped. He was a man who had made speeches in the House of Lords, who had faced down a mob at a county election, who had never in his life been at a loss for a cold word. He was at a loss now. "I have been a long time coming to a thing I ought to have seen at once," he said at last. "I owe you an apology, madam, a great one. I do not know how to begin it, and I am afraid if I try I shall do it clumsily, which will be worse than not at all. So I will only say, I have wronged you these 3 years. I know it. I have lately come to know it very well. And I should like, if you will permit it, to do better." She was silent for a moment. The candles burned. Somewhere in the house a clock struck the quarter. "I do not require an apology, Your Grace," she said. Her voice was gentle, and it was that gentleness he understood later. That was the most terrible thing about the whole speech, for there was not one grain of anger in it, and anger he might have argued with. "You were honest with me on our wedding day. You told me why you married me and what I might expect, and you have never once broken that word. I have had a great deal of liberty and a great deal of useful work and a house I have grown to love. I am not an unhappy woman. You need not reproach yourself. Truly, you need not." "That is worse," he said, low. "Do you understand that is worse? If you would be angry with me." "I was angry with you," she said, "for perhaps a year. I am not now. Anger is a fire, Your Grace, and a fire wants feeding, and you gave me nothing to feed it with, no cruelty, no presents, nothing at all. One cannot stay angry at an absence. In the end I stopped, and I found I was," she seemed to choose the word with care, "content. I have built a life inside the space you left empty. It is a good life. I am not sure. And here, for the first time, something flickered behind the grey calm, something quickly mastered. I am not sure I know how to make room in it now for a husband who has decided in the 4th year that he should like to be one. The honesty of it went through him like a blade. He had expected, if he had himself expect anything, that she would be glad, that a neglected wife, offered at last the notice of her lord, would take it as rain takes a dry field. He had not expected to be told, gently and without malice and with perfect reason, that she had learned to live without him so thoroughly that his return was itself a disturbance. I have no right to ask anything of you, he said. I know that. I am not asking. I am only, he spread his hands, a gesture of surrender strange to him, telling you that I am here, that I mean to be here. That I should like to learn to be the man I ought to have been, and that I understand it will take a long time, and that I am prepared for it to take a long time, and that I will not, his voice roughened, I will not press you, or hurry you, or ask you to feel one thing before you feel it. Only let me stay. Let me learn the estate you have made. Let me sit at this table. Let me, he almost could not say it, let me court you, Marianne, as I should have done at the first, before there was a will and a duty and a cold room, if I had had the sense God gave a stone. She looked at him a long moment, and then she did the thing that undid him more than any reproach could have done. Her eyes filled, once, brightly, with tears she did not let fall, and she looked down at her folded hands until she had mastered them, and when she looked up again she was composed. You may stay, she said quietly. It is your house. I could not prevent it if I wished. A breath. And you may sit at this table and learn the estate, for you ought to have known it years ago, and it is the poorer for a master who does not. But as for the rest, her chin lifted gently, but it lifted. I have guarded myself very carefully for 3 years, your grace. I have had to. I cannot unguard myself in an evening because you have discovered, at last, that I am worth the trouble. If you wish to court me, you must court a woman who has learned to expect nothing from you, and who will believe in the change when she sees it hold, not when she is promised it over a good dinner. I am sorry if that is hard. It is the truth, and I have found the truth generally kinder in the end than a comfortable lie. It is fair, he said when he could speak. It is entirely fair. I would not have you believe me on my word. My word has not been worth much. He rose and came round the table, and did a thing he had never done. He took her hand lightly, and bowed over it as a suitor bows, not as a husband, and set his lips to it for the briefest moment and released it. Then I begin tomorrow, he said, at the beginning, and I will not hurry you, and I will be here in a year and intend to prove it. Good night, Duchess. Good night, your grace, she said, and if her voice was not quite steady, she did not let him see it, and she went up the stairs with her back straight and her grandmother-in-law's pearls at her throat, leaving him alone at the long table with the whole ruin of 3 wasted years, and for the first time, something that might have been called hope. There was a night, in the deep of that first spring of his waking, when Julian understood at last, and completely, the full weight of what he had done, and it came to him not through a great scene but through a small door, the way the largest truths so often do. He had gone late into the library at Elverton, unable to sleep, and had taken down at random a volume from a low shelf, and found it was not a printed book at all, but one of the household ledgers, an old one, from the first year of their marriage. He had never looked into these. He sat down by the dying fire and opened it, meaning idly to see how the estate had stood, for her hand had improved it, and instead he found himself reading his wife, for the ledger was more than figures. In the margins, in her small upright hand, she had written notes to herself, never meant for any eye, and through them, as through a window, he saw the whole of that first year as she had lived it, and it was not the year he had imagined. He had pictured her, in so far as he had pictured her at all, as a competent woman contentedly running a house. He read now the truth. He read, against an entry for a great quantity of candles, the note, for the long gallery, that it may not be so dark. A bright house is a braver thing to live alone in. He read against the accounts for the tenants' Christmas. When he had been in London and had not come, kept it well, the people were kind, one does not mind so much when one is useful. He read against a physician's bill from that first winter, a single line that stopped his breath was ill a fortnight, told no one, there was no one to tell, and it would only have been a trouble. There was no one to tell. She had lain ill a fortnight in her second month of marriage, alone in a great house, with a husband 90 miles away who did not know and would not have come, and she had not sent word, because he read it 3 times to be sure of it, because it would only have been a trouble. Not to spare herself, to spare him. In the very first winter of the marriage, in which he had made it plain he wanted nothing of her, she had fallen ill and had chosen to suffer it alone, rather than lay upon him the least inconvenience of her existence. Julian sat with the ledger a long time. The fire went quite out, and somewhere in that cold dark hour he stopped, finally and forever, being able to tell himself the comfortable story he had told himself for 3 years, that his arrangement had suited her, that she had been content, that the freedom he took had cost her nothing. He had told her once she need not wait upon him, and he would not wait upon her, and he had thought it a mutual liberty, a fair exchange. He saw now that it had never been an exchange at all. He had taken the whole of the freedom and left her the whole of the loneliness. And she had borne it without a word of complaint, and had used the empty years not to nurse her grievance, but to do good to every living creature within her reach, because she was, quite simply, better than he was, better than he had ever troubled to imagine a person could be. And he had had her in his house for 3 years and never once looked. He did a thing then that he had not done since he was a boy at his mother's grave. He put his face in his hands, alone in the cold library, and wept, not the easy tears of self-pity, but the hard, tearing tears of a man who sees, all at once and too late, the exact measure of what he has thrown away and cannot get back. When it was done he sat quiet in the dark, emptied and clear, and he made himself a promise, not romantic, not exalted, but plain and hard as one of her own ledger entries, that whatever it took, whatever years it cost, however, she held him off and had every right to. He would spend the rest of his life so that his wife should never again write in any book, against any grief, the words "there was no one to tell." He did not tell her he had read the ledger. It was too much hers. To speak of it would have been to trespass. But he put it back changed, and he was changed, and the change went deeper than the pleasant courtship of the garden and the dinner table. That had been the courtship of a man who had discovered his wife was charming. This was something else. This was the reckoning of a man who had discovered his wife was noble, and that he had let her be lonely, and that no amount of coffee brought to the account room of a morning could ever quite balance the account of the winter she had lain ill and told no one. The society of the county, meanwhile, had begun in earnest to lionize her, and Julian watched it with a strange doubled feeling, pride at the world's belated homage, and a private ache that he alone knew the price at which she had earned the serenity they all admired. They saw a Duchess who was gracious and calm and good. They did not see the ledger. They did not know that the perfect composure had been forged in 3 years of solitude, that the gift of full attention to every lonely soul she met came from a woman who had herself been lonely and forgotten, and had resolved that no one in her power should ever be so if she could help it. They called her the perfect Duchess and thought it a compliment to her polish. Julian, who had read the margins, knew it for something far graver, not the perfection of a woman to whom everything had come easily, but the perfection of a soul that had been left in the cold and had chosen, against every temptation to bitterness, to become warmth for others instead. That was the miracle of her, and he alone had the whole of it, and he had come by it through his own worst sin, and he did not know whether to thank God or curse himself, and in the end did both, and went on trying to deserve her, which was the only prayer he had left. He began, as he had promised, at the beginning, and the beginning was the estate. For 3 years Julian had signed what was put before him, and thought of Elverton as a source of rents and a subject of lawsuits. Now he rode out with the steward in the raw spring mornings, and learned it as a living thing, which fields drained ill and why, which tenant was in trouble through no fault of his own, and which through drink. Where the timber had been sold short, and where the old man in the northern woods was quietly the best forester in 3 counties and had been passed over for 30 years. He learned that his wife knew all of this and more, that the ledgers she kept were a portrait of the estate more faithful than any painter's, that when a cottage roof failed at Marden it was because Marianne had known it would fail, and had been overruled by an agent who was now, at her patient insistence, no longer in their employ. He found himself those weeks, doing something he had not done since he was a boy, asking questions and listening to the answers. He asked her about the drainage, and she told him. He asked her about the orphaned vicar's daughters, and she took him, one grey afternoon, to the room she had made into a schoolroom, and he saw the two children, grave, well-taught, unafraid, rise and curtsy to the Duke they had never met, and he saw how their eyes went at once to Marianne, as everyone's eyes to Marianne, for the assurance that all was well. And he understood that his wife had made, out of the empty space of his neglect, a small good world, and had asked him for nothing to make it. He did not press her. This was the hardest discipline of his life, harder than any he had known, and he held to it. He did not take her hand after that first night. He did not speak of love. He had not the right, and he knew it. He courted her instead the way a wise man courts a wary creature, by being present and useful and steady, and by wanting nothing in return that she was not ready to give. He learned her days. He learned that she rose early and worked at the accounts before the house was awake, that she walked in the old walled garden after breakfast in all weathers, that she read at night deep serious books, history and husbandry, and once a volume of sermons that he took up after her and found marked in a small hand at a passage about the patience of the just. He began, without announcement, to be where she was, not crowding her, only there. He fell into step beside her in the walled garden and talked of the roses, which she had brought back from ruin, and of the estate, which was safe ground, and slowly, week by week, of other things. And Elverton, which had watched all this from below stairs and above with the intense, discreet interest of a great household in the affairs of its master, began to hope. Word of the change ran, as such words run, from the servants' hall to the tenants, to the county, to London. It was said the Duke had come home and stayed. It was said he rode the estate himself now and knew his tenants by name. It was said, this last with an incredulity that gratified the tellers enormously, that the cold Duke of Elverton had been seen walking in his own garden of a morning beside his own wife, and laughing at something she had said. The county, which had spent 3 years pitying the plain overlooked Duchess and privately condemning the husband who ignored her, revised its opinion with the speed of a weathercock in a changing wind, and decided it had always known there was more to that marriage than met the eye. It was Marianne's own doing in the end that brought the matter to its head, and she did it, characteristically, not for herself at all. The old Dowager Countess of Marchburn, a formidable relic of a vanished age, and the arbiter of everything that signified in society, kept her state each spring at a house in Hertfordshire and gathered to it, once a year, the whole of the county's consequence. To be asked was to be somebody. To be passed over was a wound that did not heal. For 3 years the Dowager had asked the Duke of Elverton, who never came, and had not asked his Duchess, whom she did not know and did not, on the strength of the county's early verdict, greatly wish to. This spring she did a thing that set every tongue in the shire wagging. She wrote to Elverton Hall, in her own crabbed hand, and asked to be received by the young Duchess whose praises had at last penetrated even her deaf and lofty ear. Marianne received her. Julian, banished tactfully to the far end of the house, learned afterward from a footman that the interview had lasted 2 hours, that tea had been sent for twice, and that the Dowager Countess of Marchburn, who had made grown men tremble and reduced a bishop to stammering, had come out of the yellow drawing-room leaning on the young Duchess's arm and laughing like a girl, and had said, pausing at the door with the whole household straining to hear, "My dear, you are the only sensible woman I have met in 20 years. You will dine with me on the 14th, and bring that idle husband of yours, and I will present you to the county myself, and any fool who does not see what you are may answer to me." So it was that on the 14th of May the Duke and Duchess of Elverton went together, for the first time in their marriage, into society. Julian would remember that evening all his life. He had been to 1,000 such gatherings and been bored by every one. He went to this one as nervous as a boy, and for a reason he could scarcely have named except that he was afraid. Afraid the county would slight her, afraid she would be found wanting, afraid, most of all, that he would be made to watch the world to her what he had done for 3 years, and be unable to prevent it. He need not have feared. He had forgotten, or had never truly seen, what she was. She wore silver grey and his grandmother's pearls and nothing else. In a room full of women glittering with the season's diamonds, she was the plainest dressed lady present and the one every eye returned to. And Julian, standing a little behind her, watched the thing happen that he had heard described and had not believed. She listened. That was the whole secret, and it was no secret at all, and no one else in that glittering room possessed it. She listened to the deaf old general as though his campaigns were the most interesting matter in the world. She drew out the frightened girl in her first season and left her glowing. She said to the acid Lady Ferrers, the same Lady Ferrers who had looked at her wedding sleeves and looked away. One quiet, kind thing about that lady's ailing sister that turned 3 years of well-bred contempt, in a single evening, into something like devotion. She never sought the center of the room, and the center of the room came to her. By the time the Dowager Countess rose to lead her guests to supper, she did it on the arm of the Duchess of Elverton, and the message could not have been plainer if it had been cried by a herald. This woman is my equal and my choice, and you will honor her. And they did. Julian watched all London, for half London was there, discover his wife in the space of a single evening, and give her freely and at once the thing he had withheld for 3 years. He heard the word begin to move about the room, from mouth to mouth, gathering weight as it went, until it seemed to hang in the candlelit air over the whole company. The perfect Duchess. That was what they called her before the night was out. Not the plain Duchess, not the overlooked one, not the poor bargain the cold Duke had made. The perfect Duchess, the finest hostess, the truest lady, the woman every mother in the county now wished her daughter to resemble, and every husband secretly wished he had had the wit to marry. He should have been proud. He was proud. But standing at the edge of that bright room, watching the woman he had wronged receive the homage of a world that had lately pitied her, Julian felt something colder move beneath the pride, and after a while he understood what it was. It was fear. For if all London now saw what he had been 3 years too blind to see, if the whole world had woken as he had woken to the treasure of her, then he was no longer the only man who might want her. He was merely the man who had had her first, and thrown her away, and come crawling back too late. And a woman so admired, so sought, so plainly worth 10 of the man she was chained to by a dead lord's will, such a woman had every right in the world and every temptation to look at the husband who had ignored her and turn away. London, when they came to it, was a harder school than Hertfordshire, and Julian felt the difference the moment the carriage turned into Grosvenor Square. In the country he had had her to himself. The estate was their common ground. The tenants knew and loved her. The county had already given its verdict. And there had been, apart from the county, no one to come between them but the ghost of the 3 years, which he was slowly laying to rest. London was another matter. London was full of men. London was full of men who were clever and idle and charming, and free of any sin toward her, and who now beheld, arriving among them, a duchess whom the whole town had suddenly agreed to admire, and admiration in London is a hunting cry. The house filled at once. Marianne had never opened Elverton House, never taken her place in town, and the town's curiosity was enormous. On the first evening they were at home. The square was choked with carriages, and Julian stood at his wife's side and watched London pour through his doors to look at her, and saw the looking change, as it always changed, into wanting. He watched the practised men of the world address her, expecting a country dowd or a scheming nobody, and he watched their faces alter as she answered them, quietly, exactly, with that gift of full attention that made each speaker feel briefly that he had said something worth hearing. He watched them, one after another, fall a little under the spell, and he understood, standing there in his own drawing-room, that the perfect Duchess was no longer his private discovery. She was public property now. Half the men in that room would go away in love with her before the night was out, and he would have to stand and watch it happen, again and again, all season, and hold his tongue. He had not known he had so much jealousy in him. It astonished and shamed him. He, who had been proof against every feeling for 30 years, who had watched women weep for love of him without a flicker. He stood now in agonies over a fair head bent too close to his wife's, over a laugh she gave to another man's jest, over the mere sight of the Marquis of Dean handing her in to supper, because protocol required it and Julian could not decently prevent it. And the cruelty of it, the exquisite justice, was that he could say nothing, could show nothing, because the smallest sign of a possessive husband would be, In the eyes of a woman who had watched him possess nothing of her for 3 years, the rankest hypocrisy. He had forfeited the right to jealousy on his wedding morning. He was paying the forfeit now with interest, and there was no one to blame but himself, and he knew it, and the knowing was the worst of it. Marianne, for her part, moved through it all with a serenity he found at once wonderful and maddening. She did not flirt, it was not in her, but she did not need to, and the absence of coquetry made her only the more compelling, for men wearied of practiced charm are undone by a woman who has none and needs none. She was kind to all and particular to no one, save to Julian, in the private hours, though he could not always be sure of it in the crush of the public ones. He had to take it on faith those weeks that the woman who was so freely the town's belonged, in some secret and reserved place to him, and faith did not come easily to a man who had spent his life believing only what he could count. The Marquess of Dean was the sharpest of the thorns. He was everything Julian was not, or rather everything the old Julian had been without the coldness, young, warm, open-handed, quick to laugh, and possessed of an easy sincerity that Julian's whole nature lacked. He made no secret of his admiration for the Duchess. He was too well-bred to be improper, and too honest to be sly, and he simply came evening after evening and paid her the frank court of a man who found her the most remarkable woman in London and did not care who knew it. And Marianne received him, as she received everyone, with warmth and without particularity. But Dean made her laugh the true laugh, and Julian, watching from across the room, learned what it was to hate a man he could not even dislike, for Dean was a thoroughly good fellow, and would have been Julian's friend in any other life. It came near to breaking him one evening at Rivenhall's ball. He had lost sight of her in the crush, and had gone looking with a casualness he did not feel, and had found her at last in the conservatory, alone with Dean among the orange trees, and had stopped in the doorway unseen. Dean was speaking, low and earnest, his handsome face grave, and Marianne was listening, with her head a little bent, and Julian, standing in the dark of the doorway with his heart in his mouth, could not hear the words and imagined the worst, and felt the whole precarious structure of his hope sway on its foundation. Then Marianne shook her head, once, gently, but with finality, and said something Julian could not catch, and Dean bowed, and there was in the bow the unmistakable dignity of a man accepting a refusal. And Marianne came out of the conservatory, and seeing Julian in the doorway, checked and coloured, and then came straight to him and put her hand on his arm. The first time in London she had touched him unbidden before others, and said, "Take me into supper, your grace. I find I am tired of orange trees." He took her in. He did not ask what Dean had said. He had learned that much at least. But that night, when the ball was over and they had come home and stood again in the emptying house, he could not keep it wholly in. "You need not have refused Dean on my account," he said, and heard the roughness in his own voice and could not smooth it. "He is a better man than I, younger, kinder. He has never done you a wrong in his life, and I have done you nothing but... If your heart, I have no right to your heart, Marianne, I say it plainly. If it went another way, I could not, in justice, complain." She looked at him a long moment in the light of the single branch of candles the footman had left. "Do you know," she said at last, "you are the only man of my acquaintance who would, in the same breath, be eaten alive with jealousy, and yet tell me to my face that I am free to leave him. Dean would never have said it. Dean is too sure of himself. You say it because you are not sure at all, because you know what you did, and it makes you honest even against your own interest." She shook her head slowly. "I did not refuse Dean on your account. I refused him on my own. He is everything you say, and he wants me, and it is very pleasant to be wanted by such a man. But I do not love him, and I do not think I could learn to, and I will tell you why, though it will make you unbearably proud, and I shall probably regret it. It is because Dean has never had to become anything to win me. He arrived good and easy and charming, and he has stayed so, and it has cost him nothing. And you," her voice softened, and the grey eyes were suddenly very bright, "you have had to build yourself over, plank by plank, in front of my eyes, out of the wreck of the man you were, and I have watched you do it, and I know exactly what each plank cost you, because I saw the old wood you tore out to make room. Dean's goodness is a gift he was born with. Yours is a thing you made and are still making with your bare hands for me. How could Dean's ever weigh against that?" Now stop looking at me like a starved man and light me up the stairs, and do not," her voice caught just slightly, "do not think ever again that I am comparing you to him and finding you wanting. I compared you long ago, Julian, and it is the other way about entirely." The great test of the season, and the night that fixed the phrase forever upon her, came at the Duchess of Rutherford's ball in early June, when half the crowned heads of the exiled continent were in London and all society was gathered under one roof to be looked at. Julian had not wished to go. He mistrusted these vast crushes, where a man could not reach his own wife through the press, and where the wolves of the town ran in packs. But Marianne had said, quietly, that she thought they ought. "For you have been thought a recluse these 3 years, Julian, and hidden me away. And there are those who whisper you keep me in the country from shame. It is time the town saw us stand together." And he had bowed to the wisdom of it, as he bowed now to most things she thought right, and they had gone. It was at that ball that the old Duchess of Rutherford, a woman of 90 who had known 5 reigns and feared none of them, took it into her head to hold a little court in the great drawing-room, and to summon to it one by one the ladies she wished to inspect. It was known to be an ordeal. The old Duchess was deaf and fearless, and cruel in the careless way of the very old and very great. She had reduced beauties to tears and ambassadors to silence, and to be summoned was to be put publicly to the question before the whole of society. She summoned the young Duchess of Elverton. Julian could not go with her. It was not permitted. One went alone to the old Duchess. He stood at the edge of the crowded room and watched his wife cross the floor to the throne-like chair, and felt his heart in his throat. For the old Duchess had that very hour made the young Countess of Averil weep by asking her loudly why she painted her face like an actress, and the whole room was primed and waiting for fresh blood. Marianne curtsied, and sat where she was bidden, and the old Duchess looked her up and down through a raised glass with the frank rudeness of her rank and age, and said, in the carrying voice of the deaf, "So you are Elverton's wife. They tell me he married you out of a will and never looked at you for 3 years. Is it true?" The whole room heard it. The whole room held its breath. Julian felt the blood leave his face. It was the one question in all the world he would have died to keep from being asked of her in public, the naked truth of his own sin, flung down before 500 people to see how the plain Duchess would flinch under it. She did not flinch. She looked at the terrible old woman with her clear grey eyes, and she said in a voice pitched to carry to the deaf ears and, incidentally, to the whole listening room, "It is quite true, Your Grace. My husband married me from duty, and for 3 years he was much occupied and little at home. I cannot complain of it. It gave me the running of a great estate and the freedom to do a great deal of good, and I have found idleness the only unbearable thing, and he never once condemned me to it." A small pause. Then, with a warmth that turned the whole speech on its hinge, "And I will tell Your Grace a thing not everyone knows. He has come home. He rides his own land now and knows his own people, and he has become, this past year, the truest and best man of my acquaintance, which, I own, is not the reputation the world gives him, but I am better placed than the world to judge, being married to him. If Your Grace hears otherwise, Your Grace may send the tale to me, and I will correct it." There was a silence. And then the old Duchess of Rutherford, who had not laughed aloud in the memory of anyone present, threw back her ancient head and laughed until she wheezed, and struck the arm of her chair and cried, There is a wife. Did you hear her? She owns the whole of it and turns it to her husband's glory in the same breath, and dares me to say a word against him. Elverton." Her glass swung round the room and fixed on Julian where he stood. "Elverton, come here, you undeserving creature, and let me look at the man who has contrived, by sheer good luck, to be married to the only sensible woman in England." And Julian crossed the room under the eyes of all society, and bowed to the old Duchess, and she looked from him to Marianne and back, and said more quietly now, so that only the nearest heard, "You do not deserve her, sir. You know it, I see it in your face. Good, a man who knows it may improve. See that you do. A woman who will stand up before the whole of London and make a virtue of her husband's neglect has given you more than you will ever repay. I have watched this town 30 years, and I have not seen its like. She is the perfect Duchess, sir, the perfect Duchess, and you may tell them all I said so." He told them nothing, he had no need. The old Duchess had said it in the hearing of half the room, and the phrase, which had been drifting about the town for weeks, was fixed now beyond dislodging, stamped with the authority of the one woman in England whom no one dared contradict. By morning it was everywhere. The perfect Duchess. It ran through the clubs and the drawing rooms and the columns of the papers, which called her, in a paragraph Julian read 3 times over his coffee, a lady in whom the graces of the great world are joined, as they are joined in almost none of its members, to a heart of unmistakable goodness. The perfect Duchess, as her sex's severest judge has lately pronounced her. Julian carried the paper up to the little room where she was at the accounts, and laid it before her without a word, and watched her read it. She read it with the same grave attention she gave to a bill, and when she had finished she folded the paper and set it aside and looked up at him. "Well," she said, "it is very kind. It is also nonsense. There is no perfect anything under heaven, and I know my own imperfections better than the papers do. But I find I am glad of one thing in it." Her eyes met his, and there was something in them, half rueful and half tender, that made his heart turn over. "I am glad they said it in front of you," she said, "not for my own vanity. For this, that the whole town has now told you, as loudly as it can, exactly what you had in your own house for 3 years and did not see. I do not say it to wound you. I say it because I think a man values a thing more when he has heard the world clamour for it, and I find, God help me, it is a small and unworthy feeling, and I will confess it only once. I find I do not altogether mind that they have made you jealous. It is a poor foundation for happiness, jealousy, but has been, I think, a most useful spur." And she smiled the real smile and turned back to her accounts, and left Julian standing in the doorway with the paper in his hand, laughing helplessly at the exact and merciless justice of it, and loving her, if it were possible, more than he had loved her the moment before. The season that followed was the strangest of Julian's life, and the happiest and the most precarious. He took her up to London. She consented to it, cautiously as she consented to everything now, weighing it first, and opened Elverton House in Grosvenor Square, which had stood half-shuttered for years, and watched his wife become, in the space of 2 months, the quiet centre of the town. She did not seek it. She never sought anything, but the Dowager Countess had given the word, and the word had spread, and now the invitations came in a flood, and the great ladies who had not troubled to know her called, and were charmed, and the drawing-room of Elverton House filled. On the evenings she chose to be at home, with the best and the brightest and the most powerful in England. All of them come to sit at the feet of the perfect Duchess, and go away feeling they had been, for an hour, better than themselves. And Julian, God help him, was jealous of the lot of them. He had thought he understood jealousy at the Christmas feast, watching her stoop to an old labourer. He had understood nothing. Now he watched younger men with none of his sins to answer for. Men who had never neglected a wife because they had never been fool enough to be given one and throw her away, gather about his Duchess in her own drawing-room and pay her the graceful, practised court that comes so easily to those who have nothing to atone for. He watched the young Marquis of Dean, handsome and unmarried and clever, make her laugh 3 evenings running. He watched a poet read her his verses and a statesman ask her opinion of a bill before the House and take it, visibly, more seriously than he took his colleagues. He watched the world do to his wife what he had failed to do, see her, value her, delight in her, and he stood at the edge of his own drawing-room, correct and cold and dying by inches, and had no right to say a word, because he had made the rule himself, on a wedding morning 3 years gone. "You need not wait upon me, and I shall not wait upon you." The bitter justice of it was not lost on him. He had built the empty space. Other men were filling it now, and he could hardly complain that the vacancy he had advertised for 3 years had at last attracted tenants. He held to his discipline. He did not reproach her, or watch her jealously to her face, or play the possessive husband. He had forfeited that part, and to seize it now would be the meanest thing he could do, and would prove her right that his change was but the appetite of a man who wants a thing only once others want it too. He courted her still in the old patient way, in the quiet hours the world did not see, the early morning before the callers came, when he brought her coffee to the small room where she did the accounts and sat with her while she worked, the late night after the guests had gone, when the great house emptied and they were left, husband and wife, in the sudden ringing quiet, and talked, really talked, as they had never talked in the first 3 years, of the estate, of the tenants, of the vicar's daughters, of the book she was reading and the one he had found for her, of everything and nothing, until the candles burned down and one of them said at last that it was late. Those hours were the truest of his life. He came to live for them, and he came slowly to understand that she permitted them, that of all the men who thronged her drawing room, only he was allowed into the small room in the morning and the quiet house at night, that this was her gift, given deliberately, the first thing she had freely given him, and that it was worth more than all the homage of London, and more fragile, and that a wrong word would end it. He very nearly said the wrong word all the same, one night in June, and it was the young Marquis of Dean who provoked it. There had been a great crush at Elverton House. The whole world, it seemed, the rooms hot with candles and jammed with silk, and Dean had monopolized the Duchess for the better part of an hour in the window embrasure, his fair head bent to hers, and had said something at the end of it that made her go very still, and then very grave, and rise, and leave him, and cross the whole length of the room to stand, for no reason the company could see, beside her husband. She had not touched Julian. She had only stood at his side, close in the sight of everyone, with a stillness he could feel, and Dean, in the window, had watched her go with the face of a man who has thrown for high stakes and lost, and had made his bow soon after and gone. Julian said nothing until the last guest had gone, and the servants had put out the candles, and they stood together in the empty drawing-room in the grey light of a summer dawn. "Dean spoke to you tonight," he said. He kept his voice level with an effort that cost him more than any speech in the Lords. "You need not tell me what he said. It is not I have no right. But you left him, and you came to me." He looked at her. "Why?" She was quiet a long time. The dawn came up grey and pearl at the windows. "He asked me a question," she said at last, "that no honourable man should ask another man's wife, and he asked it, I think, because half the world has decided that our marriage is an arrangement of convenience and nothing more, and that a woman so placed might reasonably—" She stopped. "He was wrong. I told him he was wrong, and I told him not to speak to me so again, and then I found I did not wish to be on that side of the room any longer. I wished to be here." She looked up at him, and the grey eyes were steady, but there was something new in them, something she had guarded for 3 years and was letting him see for the space of a breath. "I have been a great deal admired this season, your grace. I find it does not touch me. It is a strange thing to be seen by everyone, and to care only whether one is seen by—" She did not finish. She looked away. "It grows light," she said. "I have kept you standing. Good night." He did not touch her. He had promised himself he would not, until she reached first. But he could not let her go on that. "When you crossed the room tonight," he said, "and stood beside me, before all of them, do you know what you gave me? You gave me the only hour in 3 years that I have not felt like a beggar at my own table. I have wanted to say a great many things to you these 2 months, and have held my tongue, because I promised I would not hurry you. I hold it still. I wished you to know that I saw what you did, and what it cost you, and that I—" His voice was not steady now, and he let it not be. "That I am not the man who married you. I do not know if that man can be forgiven. But he is gone, and the one who stands here would give the whole of Elverton, and the title with it, for the right to earn what those men in your drawing-room have not the least idea how to value. That is all. Good night, Duchess. Sleep well." He bowed and turned to go, so that she should not feel any pressure to answer, and he was at the door when her voice stopped him. "Julian." It was the first time in their marriage she had spoken his name. He turned. She stood in the pearl grey light with her hands folded, and her chin was not quite steady, and she said very simply, "I begin to believe you. I did not mean to, I have been very careful not to, but I begin to. A breath. Do not make me sorry for it. That is all I ask. I have survived a great deal, your grace, but I do not think I could survive believing you and being wrong." "You will not be wrong," he said. "See that I am not," said the perfect Duchess, and went up to bed, and left her husband standing in the dawn with his heart going like a boy's, and a terror in him greater than any he had known. Not that he would lose her to Dean or to any man, but that some folly of his own, some ghost of the cold Duke he had been, would rise up when he least expected it and prove her right to have been afraid. The ghost rose when it came out of the one quarter Julian had never thought to guard, the dead hand of his grandfather, and the will that had made the marriage in the first place. It came in the person of Mr. Pettigrew, the family's man of law, who arrived at Elverton House one morning in July with a face like a mute at a funeral and a letter that had lain, he explained, in a sealed packet among the late Duke's private papers, to be opened only upon the present Duke's marriage and the confirmation of the estate. A confirmation which the passing of a certain quiet period, now elapsed, had at last made final. Julian took the letter into his study and read it alone, and when he had read it he sat a long time very still, and the thing he had spent 3 years learning to feel, hope, went out of him like a snuffed candle. The letter was in his grandfather's hand, hard and black and sure. It informed the 7th Duke, with the old man's characteristic contempt for sentiment, that the clause requiring marriage to a Wayland daughter had never been about the joining of 2 estates at all. The northern land was a trifle. The old Duke had cared nothing for it. The marriage clause had been a test and a punishment and a piece of cold engineering aimed at the grandson he had judged, correctly, to be growing into exactly the sort of proud, cold, self-pleasing man the old Duke most despised, because he had been that man himself, and had ruined his own marriage and his own life with it, and had died alone and known it. I have watched you, the letter said. You will marry where I command, and you will marry a girl of no fortune and less consequence, a girl the world will say is beneath you, and you will do it from naked duty, because you are too cold to do anything from love. And then, having chained yourself to a good woman you did not choose and do not want, you will do one of 2 things. You will neglect her, as I neglected mine, and rot in the same cold I rotted in, or, if there is anything in you worth the saving, you will come, too late and by the hardest road, to love her, and either way you will have learned, as I learned only at the graveside, what a man throws away when he weds from duty and lives from pride. It was the last paragraph that stopped Julian's breath. There is a further matter, the old Duke had written, that you may as well know, for it changes nothing, and I am past caring who is hurt by it. The Wayland girls' portions, such small portions as their spendthrift father left them, did not come from Wayland at all. Sir Henry died insolvent. His daughters would have gone as governesses and companions into the households of their betters, which is a species of genteel servitude I would not wish on a dog. It was I who quietly settled a competence on each of them through agents, so that the younger might be married respectably to my grandson, and the elder decently to whomever would have her. Your Duchess believes she brought you a small fortune of her own. She brought you nothing but herself. The money was mine and now is yours, and she does not know it, and you may tell her or not as you please. I should not, if I were you. Women do not care to learn that their whole standing in the world was a stranger's charity, arranged to bait a trap. Julian sat with the letter until the light changed in the study windows. He understood, reading it a second time and a third, the exact and terrible shape of the thing his grandfather had built. Marianne believed herself a gentleman's daughter who had brought her husband a modest portion. Poor, yes, and overlooked, but not a pauper, not an object of charity, not a girl who would have gone into service, but for a dead lord's secret hand. Her dignity, the quiet, unbreakable dignity that was the whole spine of her, rested in some part on that belief. And the old Duke, from the grave, had handed his grandson the choice of leaving her that dignity or shattering it, and had counted, with his cold accuracy, on pride and convenience to keep the grandson silent. The old man had wanted him to say nothing. That was the sting of it, the final elegant cruelty of the dead. He had wanted Julian to be, one last time, the calculating, self-serving man who protects his own comfort, to keep the secret, not to spare his wife, but to spare himself the difficulty of her knowing. And Julian understood, sitting there in the changing light, that this was the test that had outlasted all the others. Everything else, the neglect, the waking, the courtship, had been prologue. This was the reckoning. His grandfather had reached out of the grave to ask him a single question. Are you still that man, or are you not? He knew what the old Julian would have done. The old Julian would have burned the letter and said nothing, and kept his wife's happiness and his own peace intact upon a foundation of concealment, and called it kindness, and been comfortable. And it would have been the coward's road, and it would have been, in the deepest sense, the cold man's road, the very road his grandfather had bet he would take, and every quiet hour he spent with her afterward, every morning coffee and every midnight talk, would have had a lie sitting at the bottom of it like a stone at the bottom of a clear well. He could not do it. He had told her in the dawn that he was not the man who married her. This was where he found out whether it was true. He carried the letter to her that evening. He found her in the small room, the account room, at the hour he had made his own, and he shut the door, and he did not sit down. "I have had a letter," he said, "from my grandfather. He has been dead 6 years, and he has contrived to write to me all the same, which is very like him." He laid it on the table between them. "It concerns you. It concerns our marriage and how it came to be, and a thing you do not know and have every right to know, and which I could keep from you very easily, and which he wished me to keep from you. I find I would rather stand in front of you as an honest man than a comfortable one. Will you read it? I will stay or go as you like, but read it, and know that whatever it does to what has been growing between us these months, I chose to give it to you rather than build on a lie. I have built enough on lies. I am done with it." She looked at him a long moment, and then at the letter, and then she took it up and read it, there in the small room, in the last of the July light. He watched her read. He watched the color go from her face and come back and go again. He watched her reach the last paragraph. He knew the instant she reached it, and go absolutely still, the stillness he had seen the night Dean spoke to her, the stillness of a wall receiving rain. When she had finished, she set the letter down very carefully, squaring its edges to the table, as she squared everything, and she sat with her hands folded and her eyes upon the middle distance, and she did not speak for so long that he thought his heart would stop. "So," she said at last, and her voice was quite level, and that levelness frightened him more than any weeping could have. "I was a pauper, and did not know it. I was to have gone into service. I remember it, you know. I remember Cassandra and I speaking of it, which of us should apply where, in the winter, our father died. And then the settlement came out of nowhere, and it was called a legacy of our mother's, and we were saved, and I never questioned it, because her voice did not break, but it thinned the way ice thins over deep water, because I did not wish to question a thing that had saved us. And it was your grandfather. It was bait. I was bait. I was a poor girl bought and set in a trap to catch you, and you married the trap from duty, and every good opinion this whole town has formed of me this season, the perfect Duchess, sits on top of a lie that a dead man arranged for his own amusement." She looked up at him, and her eyes were dry and terrible. "Did you know? Before tonight? Did you know when you married me?" "No," he said. "Before God, Marianne, no. I learned it this morning in the letter you hold, and I have carried it about the house all day like a live coal, and the moment I could get you alone I brought it to you, because I could not bear to sit across a table from you knowing a thing about your own life that you did not. That is all I know how to swear. He hid it from us both. He used us both. I married you thinking you a gentleman's daughter with a modest portion. You married me thinking the same of yourself, and we were neither of us more than pieces on his board." "Pieces on his board," she repeated softly. She rose. She walked to the window and stood looking out at the summer dusk over the square, her back to him, and Julian had the sensation of watching, in real time, the careful structure of 3 years, the dignity, the containment, the hard-won peace, come under a strain he could not measure and could not ease. When she spoke again, her voice was very low. "I built everything on it, do you understand?" she said. "Not on riches. I never had riches. On the belief that I was, at least, myself. That whatever I had made of this house and this life I had made honestly as myself, a gentlewoman fallen on hard times, but a gentlewoman still, owing my place to no one's charity. It was the one thing that was mine. He has taken even that. And you," she turned, and her control cracked at last. Just once, the way a fine glass cracks, a single clear line running through it, and the sight of it was the worst thing Julian had ever seen. "You have handed me the knife he left, and told me it is honesty. And perhaps it is, perhaps you are right, and I would rather know. But I cannot. Tonight I cannot. I need you to go, Leon, please. I have been very strong for a very long time, and I find I have come to the end of it, and I do not wish you to see. Please." And Julian, who wanted with every fibre of himself to cross the room and take her in his arms and hold her while she broke, because that is what a husband does, Julian looked at her, and understood that the one gift he had left to give her was the gift of not being watched. And that to seize the moment for his own comfort, to make her weep against his coat so that he might feel forgiven, would be the last and worst act of the cold, selfish man he was trying to bury. So he did the hardest thing he had ever done. He bowed to his wife, and he said, "I will go. I am within call the whole night, if you should want me, and I will not sleep. But I will not come unless you send." And he went out and shut the door softly behind him, and stood in the dark passage with his hand against the wall, and heard, through the panel, the sound he had been waiting 3 years to spare her, and had now, in the name of honesty, been the cause of, the sound of the perfect Duchess, alone in the account room, at last beginning to weep. In the days after the night of the letter, a great quiet settled over Elverton House, and it was not the old cold quiet of the neglected years, but something new, the careful, held-breath quiet of two people standing very the edge of everything, each afraid to be the one who moved first. For Marianne had forgiven him in the grey dawn on the little stair. She had said she loved him, and had let herself be held, and Julian had believed it with his whole heart in the moment. But he was learning in the days that followed that forgiveness is not a door that once opened stays open. She had forgiven him, and she loved him, and she was, all the same, shaken to her foundations by what the letter had told her, and a woman shaken does not become whole again overnight, and Julian, who a year before would have expected gratitude and glad surrender, had learned enough to know that his task now was not to be reassured, but to reassure, to be, for once, the steady thing, the wall against which she might lean while the storm of it passed through her. So he was steady. It was the hardest steadiness of his life, for everything in him wanted haste, wanted to seize the reconciliation and make it solid, to hurry to the second wedding he had proposed, to hear her say again the words she had said on the stair, over and over, until his own fear was quieted. He did none of it. He saw that his fear was his own affair and no burden to lay on her, and he set himself instead simply to be present and gentle, and to ask nothing. He brought her coffee in the mornings as before, and did not speak of the letter, and let her speak of it or not as she chose. Some mornings she was silent. Some mornings she talked in her plain exact way, working through the thing aloud as she worked through a column of figures, and he listened, and did not argue, and did not try to make it smaller than it was. "I keep thinking," she said, one such morning, "of Cassandra. My sister was to be married respectably too, the letter said, decently, to whoever would have her. And she was married. She married Mr. Fenwick the year after us, and I always thought it a good match, a love match even, and now I do not know. Was hers arranged too? Bought too? I cannot ask her. How could I ask her such a thing? And so I carry it alone, this knowing that poisons even the memory of my sister's wedding day." She turned the coffee cup slowly in her hands. "That is what he did, your grandfather. That is the real cruelty of him. He did not only deceive me about myself. He put a doubt into everything behind me, the whole of my past, so that I cannot look back at any of it without wondering what strings were pulled that I never saw. He has made a liar of my own history." Julian was quiet a moment. Then he said, "May I tell you what I think? You need not take it. Tell me. I think your sister's happiness is her own, whatever hand arranged the match, exactly as yours is your own. You said it yourself on the stair. He can have the bait, he cannot have the woman. He arranged the wedding, he did not arrange the marriage. Whatever Fenwick's suit began as, if your sister is happy in it, that happiness is real and hers, and no scheme of a dead man's touches it. And I think he chose the words with care, for they were the truest and hardest he had. I think you must decide once and for all whether a thing that begins in another's design can become, in the living of it, wholly your own. Because if it cannot, then we are both lost, you and I. For our marriage began in the coldest design of all, and if the beginning poisons the whole, then there is no hope for us. But if it can, if a thing badly begun may yet be well made, by the two people who live it, into something none of the beginners intended, then there is every hope. Then he has failed with you and me as I believe your sister has failed to let him touch her. That is the whole question, Marianne. Not what we were made for, what we choose to make of it." She looked at him a long time across the little room, and something eased in her face, some knot he had watched her carry for days. "Where," she said softly, "did you learn to say a thing like that? The man I married 3 years ago could not have said it. He had not the words, and he had not the thought behind the words. He hadn't, Julian agreed. He learned it, both the thought and the words, from a woman who has been quietly practicing exactly that art, of making a chosen good thing out of a badly given one for 3 years, under his own roof, where he was too blind to see it. I only put into a speech what you have been living all along. You made a home out of an empty marriage and a loved life out of a lonely one, and good out of my neglect. You have been answering your grandfather's question with your whole life since the day we wed, and answering it better than any words. I am only very late, learning to say aloud what you already knew how to do. And at that Marianne set down the cup and rose, and came round the little table, and did the thing that told him, more than any words could, that the door had opened again and this time would stay open. She came and stood before him and put her 2 hands against his chest, over his heart, and leaned her forehead against them, and let him at last put his arms around her and hold her, not in forgiveness sought, not in grief, but simply as a wife stands in the arms of a husband she has decided, freely and with her eye open, to keep. Then we shall make it our own, she said against him, the whole of it. The will, and the bait, and the 3 cold years, and the letter, all of it. We shall take it away from him and make it ours. You are right, Julian. It is the only answer that does not let him win. And I find, she drew back and looked up at him, and there were tears in the grey eyes, but they were not grieving tears. I find I would rather build a true thing on a false foundation with you than live in a false peace on a foundation I only imagined was true. He gave us a bad beginning. Very well, we are neither of us beginners any longer. Let us make an end he never dreamed of. They were quietly a great deal in one another's company after that, and the household, which had held its breath, breathed again. And the news went out along the invisible wires that carry such news, that whatever cloud had passed over Elverton House was gone, and the Duke and Duchess were seen walking in the square of a morning, close together, the Duke's dark head bent to hers. And when Julian proposed, gravely, that they be married again, truly this time, in the old church, before God and the county and their own 2 selves, for no reason on earth but choice, Marianne did not weigh it and consider it and hold him at arm's length as she had held him for months. She said yes at once, and simply, and put her hand in his, and it was the first time in the whole history of their marriage that she had given him a thing without first making certain he had earned it. And Julian understood that this, more than the words on the stair, more than anything, was the sign that he was forgiven, that she trusted him now, not because he had proved himself in this instance or that, but wholly as one trusts the ground, and he took the gift of it with a humility that would have astonished every man who had ever known the cold of Elverton, and had no more idea than they how such a man had come to be capable of it. He kept his word. He did not sleep. He sat the whole of that short summer night in the passage outside the account room. On a hard chair a footman brought him without comment, and he did not come unless she sent, and she did not send. Toward dawn the weeping ceased, and he heard her moving, and once he heard her speak, not to him. He thought, from the shape of it, that she was praying, and then the door opened, grey in the grey light, and she stood there with her face washed clean and composed and older than it had been the day before, and looked at the Duke sitting all night in a hard chair outside her door. And something moved in her face that he could not read. You stayed, she said. I said I would be within call. You have been within call for a night. You were not within call for 3 years. It was not spoken cruelly. It was spoken as a fact, the way she spoke all facts, and it went into him all the deeper for that. I have been thinking these hours, she said. I have been very angry and very grieved, and I have said a great many bitter things to God and to your grandfather, who deserved them, and I am tired now, and I find the anger has burned down as anger does, and left me clearer. May I say what I have arrived at? You need not answer. I only wish to say it once plainly, and then I think we may both sleep. Say it, he said. She came and sat on the top of little stair as a girl might, with the dawn behind her, and Julian stayed where he was below her, looking up, which seemed to him exactly right. Your father meant this letter to destroy me, or to make me hate you, or both, she said. I have been turning it over all night, and I've decided he shall have neither. It is true that I was poor, and that I was helped without knowing it, and that I owed my place to a stranger's cold scheme. Very well, that is what I was. But it is not what I have become, and it is not what I made of Elverton, and it is not, her voice steadied on the word, it is not the truth of who I am. He arranged that a poor girl should be set in your path. He did not arrange that she should turn a ruined house into a home, or settle a 10-year feud, or take in 2 orphans, or be called by a whole town the truest lady in it. He did not arrange 1 hour of the good I have done. That was mine, that was always mine. He can have the bait. He cannot have the woman. I decided that somewhere in the middle of the night, and I find I believe it, and I find it has set me free of him. She looked down at her husband. And as for you, she said, more quietly still, you had the chance to keep this from me, and to keep me happy and yourself comfortable on a lie, and it would have been the easiest thing in the world, and the old Julian would have done it. You said so yourself, and you were right. And you did not do it. You brought me the knife and stood still while I used it on you. Do you know what that told me? It told me the thing I have been afraid to believe for 3 months. It told me you have truly changed. A cold man protects his comfort. You gave yours up for my right to the truth. No one has ever put my dignity above their own peace before, Julian, not once in my life. You did it last night, and you did it knowing it might cost you everything you have been trying to win. Her eyes were bright, but she did not weep now. She was past weeping, into some clear country beyond it. So he has failed, your grandfather. He meant this letter to prove you were still his creature. It has proved the opposite. It has proved you are not. Julian could not speak. He had sat all night braced for the loss of her, and here in the dawn she was handing him, out of the very wreckage the old man had contrived, the one thing he had thought forfeited beyond recovery. Marianne, he managed at last. I do not deserve. No, she agreed, and for the first time in the whole of that terrible night, the ghost of a smile touched her mouth. You do not. Deserving has very little to do with it, I have found. I did not deserve to be neglected for 3 years, and I was. You do not deserve to be forgiven. And I find I am going to forgive you all the same, because I am tired of guarding a heart that has decided, without consulting me, that it would rather be yours. She said it plainly, as she said everything, and the plainness of it went through him like light through water. I love you, she said. I have been fighting it since the night you called your grandmother's pearls absurd and made me sit at your right hand. I did not want to. Loving you seemed the surest way to be destroyed. But I have watched you these months, and I have watched you this night, and I am done fighting. I love you, Julian Ashcombe, and I would rather risk you than spend the rest of my life safe and alone in a house full of your absence. There it is said. Now you may say something if you can think of anything, though I warn you I have said all the good ones. He rose. He climbed the little stair. And the Duke of Elverton, who had married from cold duty and lived from pride and neglected the best woman in England for 3 years, knelt down on the top step in the grey London dawn before his own wife, and took both her ink-stained hands in his, and pressed his forehead to them as a penitent to an altar, and said the only thing left in him to say. Then let me spend the rest of my life proving I know what I have, he said, muffled against her hands. Let me court you every day of it. Let me be the man who saw you last of all the world and loved you longest. I cannot give you back the 3 years, they are gone, and they are my great shame, and I will not pretend they were not. But I can give you every year that is left, and I will make each of them worth 10 of what I stole. I love you, Marianne, not the perfect Duchess that London loves, though I am proud past bearing that they love her. I love the woman with ink on her finger who sat in a cold room adding me up and finding me wanting, and was right. Marry me again, he said, lifting his head. Not for a will, not for a dead man's clause. In our own church, with no reason on earth but that I choose you freely, the way I ought to have chosen you at the first, you and no clause, and no fortune and no duty, only you. Say you will. I will, said the perfect Duchess, and drew her husband up out of his penitence and into her arms at last, and held him, and let herself, for once, be held. They were married again in September, in the small grey church at Elverton, with the tenants at the gate and the vicar's orphans strewing the path, and the whole county come to see it, and no one there but the 2 of them and the old dead Duke in his forgotten grave understood entirely what was being undone and remade. The Dowager Countess of Marchburn wept, which no one had seen her do in living memory, and said afterward it was the draught. Colonel Standish stood up as the Duke's man and told him he was luckier than any dog deserved to be, and Julian agreed with all his heart. And when the Duke turned to his Duchess at the altar, not because a will required it, not from duty, not from pride, but because in the whole wide world there was no other place he wished to stand, he said the words this time looking straight into the grey eyes that had judged him truly on the first day and forgiven him truly on the worst night, and he meant every one of them as he had never meant anything in his life. He told her the whole of the story, that winter, the two of them by the fire in the long gallery she had brought back from ruin, under the eyes of the third Duke she had rescued from the attics. He told her he had married her to spite her beauty and to keep an estate. He told her he had noticed the ink on her finger before he had noticed anything kind about her. He told her he had been jealous of an old labourer and a poet and the Marquess of Dean and half of London, and she laughed at that. The real laugh he had heard first at the Christmas feast and now heard every day, and told him he was a great fool and had always been one, and she supposed she must make the best of it. There was one thing he told her that winter that he had told no one, and had thought never to tell, of the night he had found the old ledger in the library, and read in the margins the words "there was no one to tell," and wept alone in the cold and made his promise. He had meant to keep it to himself forever, for it was hers and it shamed him. But he found, sitting with her by the fire, that there were to be no more locked rooms between them, and so he told her, plainly, what he had read and what it had done to him, and Marianne was silent a long while. And then she reached and took his hand, and said only, "I'd not know you had read that. I am glad you told me. And I will tell you the other half of it, which the ledger did not say, that in that same fortnight, ill and alone, I decided I would not let the loneliness make me hard, whatever it cost, because a hard woman would have been his victory, and I would not give it him. You wept over the loneliness. Weep instead, if you must weep, over the fact that it did not win. That is the truer story." And Julian, who had carried the guilt of that winter like a stone, felt the stone at last set down, not because she had absolved the neglect, she never pretended it had not happened, but because she had shown him that even his worst sin had not been able to spoil her, and that the good in her was stronger than the, and if the tenants of Elverton, passing the great house of a winter evening, saw two figures at the lit window of the little account room where the master and mistress now sat together over the ledgers night after night, they said among themselves that there was no happier hearth in all the county, and in that, for once, the whole county and the two people at the window were entirely of one mind.